Dr. Sunberg, welcome back to the Holiness Today podcast. Friend of the show, promoter of the show, kind of one of our biggest champions. So welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for the Holiness Today podcast.
Great to be with you today, Nate.
It's good to have you. So where have you been? All over, but where are you at now? Are you back in Kansas right now?
I am. I'm at home today, and I'm so glad to be home, but I've just finished my whole southeastern United States summer tour of district assemblies, and it's been a beautiful time. I've loved being at all these assemblies, and I'll tell you what, God is on the move, and things are really happening in the Church of the Nazarene. Every district, there were just really good things happening. So I thank the Lord for that.
Good. And so you're done. There's no more assemblies in USA, Canada for you to travel to?
Nope, I'm done.
So how does that work? So for our listeners, once you finish with USA, Canada, then where do you go off to next? You get assigned a certain region, if I'm remembering correctly, that you'll go off to. Is that right? How does that work?
Well, we have a 2-year assignment. And so my 2 years are South America and the southeastern part of the United States. So we do about 6 months of the year. Our focus is outside the U.S. and 6 months is inside the U.S. So this is kind of my USA season right now. And then it'll shift.
You'll be shifting off. So if you could share one story of of seeing the Spirit move. You said you saw the Spirit move. Can you share an anecdotal story? Maybe you probably shouldn't share many, but anything that's been on your mind as you've been kind of thinking about what you've just been through the last few months?
Well, I'll tell you what, at the Florida District Assembly, there was just an unusual movement of the Holy Spirit throughout that assembly. And, we got to the last service and got to the ordination service, and I just felt like the Lord was speaking, and I just don't even know how to describe it. At the end, there was just sort of this spontaneous altar call and people giving their lives to Christ and people answering the call to ministry. And it was just almost like holy chaos for a little bit because it was so, it was just God at work. And it was just really powerful. But the reality is that there were glimpses of that happened at so many of the assemblies and so many people being called to ministry and stuff. It's just been a really powerful season.
Yeah. And what, when you preach at assemblies, do you have a certain text you preach from, or do you kind of, how do you do that? What have you been preaching from? Share us a bit about what God's been teaching you in the proclamation ministry.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, the Lord works differently through every general superintendent. So this is not how the others work necessarily, but I feel like I really seek out what does the Lord want me to say for a season. And so usually I have kind of a set of messages for that season that I repeat at every district assembly, because there's kind of like, this is what the Lord is having me say. And so I've just finished a season of really focusing on centers of holy fire, using Luke 3:16, where they come and the people approach John the Baptist and they want to know, is he the Messiah? And he says, no, I baptize you with water, but the one who comes after me will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. And the reason I went to that passage of scripture is, that I'm a historical theologian and I'm always looking at church history. So I've spent quite a bit of time studying the older general superintendents, kind of the first, second, third generations of general superintendents, and kind of trying to see what did they do at district assemblies. Phineas Brzee, I find really fascinating. What did he do? He preached a lot on holy fire. And actually, that was a passage of scripture that really spoke to him, was the passage I just quoted to you. And I've used a quote from him this past year. It was from the 1914 District Assembly in Nebraska. Now, all of that, there are roots to all of that I find really fascinating because my family's roots are from Nebraska. 1914, there's a chance that my grandfather was at that district assembly and actually heard Brzee preach.
That's really cool.
And Phineas Brzee talks about, it is our primary responsibility, and he's talking about district assembly, to get heaven open and the divine glory down and mighty supernatural power. And I thought to myself, wow, Is that really what we think our primary responsibility is at district assembly? And then he says, we need to have people filled with holy fire, and then make and keep centers of holy fire everywhere that we go. So that really there was this emphasis on the fire of the Holy Spirit and the presence of the Holy Spirit in the lives of the people. Then I kind of did a little bit of a study, like what would happen throughout the week at a district assembly. Now, usually it was kind of week long. It was often tied into camp meeting. So you might have camp meeting services at night, business services in the morning. But a lot of the time, Phineas Brzee would just get up and he would begin by singing and praising God, and then inviting people to come around the altar and pray. And it wasn't so much about the preached word as it was about the experience of being in the presence of the Lord. And there was someone who had written about Brzee and about the effectiveness of his messages on Sunday, and about the response around the altars at Los Angeles First Church. And I've just also gone through reading a whole series of his sermons that he wrote on Acts. And they said, it wasn't so much about the eloquence of his preaching as it was about the amount of time that he spent in prayer on Saturday, so that when he stepped in the pulpit on Sunday, he did it with a holy anointing. So that's been the season that I've been in. And now I'm going to tell you, like, what comes up next. I actually start a sabbatical on Saturday.
Oh,
and it's
good.
the first real sabbatical I'll have ever had in my life. And I have 3 months of a sabbatical.
Good.
But part of that is seeking the Lord and seeking out what would God want me to be sharing in the next season, so that I'm prepared when I come back in November. I'll start a tour in South America. And it's like, so what does God want me to be saying to the church then? And then back to the U.S. church next year. So I'm just seeking that from the Lord right now.
Now, are you going, if you can share, what are you going to be doing on your sabbatical? Are you traveling, or do you have it structured? See, for me, rest would be something that'd have to be pretty unstructured. Structuring is non-restful for me, but what are you doing with your sabbatical? Intentional rest, of course.
So there is a lot of rest involved in it, and I'm really grateful for that. Let me see if I can talk. Grateful for that and the opportunity to slow down a bit. At the same time, what feeds my soul sometimes is the ability to just really hear from the Lord. And I love to look at church history. So there's a part of all of that that's mixed in with that. I'm going to start out by just going away to a cabin in the mountains and spending some just time peacefully there. I have been doing a little bit of research then again on the early holiness movement. And the Second Great Awakening and the role of Charles Finney in that. The biography of Charles Finney is written by A.M. Hills, who is a student of Finney's at Oberlin in Ohio. And A.M. Hills goes on to, maybe you know this, to found the Texas Holiness Institute, which ends up becoming a part of Southern Nazarene University. So there's this whole link to who we are. But I'm actually going to go to Ohio and spend some time in the United Methodist Archives to look at the kind of the initial work of that holiness movement about the 1850s. Now, some people might say that just does not sound relaxing. You have to know that is incredibly relaxing and fun for me. As much as going to the mountains and relaxing, sitting in some archives is like awesome for me.
Yeah. Well, context for our listeners. I was blessed to be able to instruct. It's not teach, because you taught it. The NCOS Intro to Church History class. I don't even know what they call it. It's not a quarter. It's 8 weeks. But I'm just amazed. You, Scott Dermott, and Hunter Dale Cummings. Just exhaustive research. So the question I was going to ask you, there's plenty of questions I can ask you about the NCOS. Well, real quick, tell us what the NCOS program is, and how UCRO and ARCOSAC and ICOSAC, which are so many acronyms I'm throwing around for our listeners. We can talk about all that, but tell us how that kind of came to be, if you can. go as long as you want, but probably in short. And then I just want to ask a follow-up question on that real quick.
Okay, well, first of all, NCOS, it's not for credit, course of study. It's not a credentialed program. It's not a degree. It's not a degree program. And so, I probably, Nate, there's a whole backstory that I'm not sure you would know as to how all of that grew. And it actually goes all the way back to Russia. So I could go all the way back there, and
Let's
maybe
do it.
people would find this
No,
fascinating.
I think you should. Let's do it. We'll be right back with the rest of this episode.
When you think of missions, who do you picture? The truth is, God is calling all kinds of people. He calls teachers who shape the next generation, nurses who bring healing, communicators who tell stories, finance professionals who strengthen ministry, youth leaders who invest in young people, skilled tradespeople, creatives, problem solvers, all kinds of people. And He may be calling you. Why don't you explore what's possible by visiting our website, nazarene.org/global missions.
Now back to the rest of your episode.
So Chuck and I were asked to move to the former Soviet Union. We moved to Russia in 1992, just after it was, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And honestly, we were a young couple, incredibly overwhelmed with what we found in front of us, and wondered how in the world do we tackle this part of the world with millions of people, and how would you set a foundation for what we have to do? Our regional director said to us, I don't think that the doors will stay open forever. I want you to imagine you have 10 years to build everything you need to build so that the church could continue. And then if you were kicked out, it would be able to move on. So we focused a lot on laying a foundation. And what would that foundation look like? Well, we had everybody under the sun coming over and trying to tell us how to do what to do. And so wonderful, well-meaning people, but a very young couple that was very overwhelmed by it all. So finally, he said, I'm going to send to you Russ Bredholt. And Russ Bredholt came as a consultant, a strategist to help us think. And we ended up creating a strategic plan of what we thought needed to happen. But part of what we felt like needed to happen was, if we were going to have this foundation laid, you had to have trained pastors and leaders to pass along the faith, to raise up the next generation. So we had this vision of theological education, and how could it be multiplied, and how could it reach all over the whole former Soviet Union? So my husband meets with a group of people, and this is now, I think, 1993, after General Assembly. He meets with a group of business people in Indianapolis, and they said, talk to us about what you're thinking about. Well, he pulls out this strategic plan. He goes, I have this idea of the strategic plan. And one of the members looked at it and he said, I see that part of your strategic plan is theological education. He says, how about if I give you $15,000? I think that's what the number was. But he says, to fund a consultation to bring together minds from all over the world to think about what that might look like. So we gathered an entire group of people from all over to come to Kiev, Ukraine, which is lovingly referred to as the Kiev consultation. And if you were there, you knew that you were there because it was in Kiev. I think it was in October. And you have to know, in that part of the world, the government waits until it's been cold enough, a certain number of days before they turn on the heat, because everything is centralized. The government runs everything. So we were all in this hotel, and that's giving it a lot of credit, but we had no heat and we had no hot water, and it was freezing cold. So everybody remembers the Kiev consultation. As a matter of fact, I remember one individual telling us, all I do is wear all the clothes I brought with me on this trip, and I just rotate what's on the outside every day. No joke, at night, we were sleeping under the carpets. We would take the carpet off the floor and put it on the bed. Some people had hair dryers, and they would try to warm the bed before they climbed into the bed at night to try and stay warm. I know people were sleeping with like the Delta Airlines eye covers over their ears to try and keep them warm. So it was an incredibly memorable event, the Kiev consultation. Well, over a series of 2 or 3 days, this group of individuals met together and they hammered out the non-credited course of study for students in the former Soviet Union of 24 courses and what that would look like. And so as they hammered out that design, they came out of that consultation with a framework of what that would look like. But we had no resources. We had no money. We had no way to do anything like this. And we were still praying, okay, God, how do you do this? Well, one of the people that was present was Jerry Lambert, who at that time was the head of the International Board of Education. And Jerry took that plan with him. And I don't remember now all the exact details, but he has this plan in his hand and he's somewhere, and it seems to me like he's on a bus somewhere. And he runs into this woman that has been placed in charge of a charitable trust. And it was some people that had died and left their money and wanted it to be used for theological education and missions around the world. He ends up developing a relationship with this woman, is able to present this idea of what we have for the former Soviet Union, and they give us $400,000 to implement it. And so from there, it starts the development of the modular course of study. And it is originally created to be used in the former Soviet Union.
Wow.
But
I did not know that.
Most people don't. And
That's pretty
because
cool.
of Jerry Lambert's relationship
Yeah.
with the trust, they end up saying, Jerry says, you know what, maybe this would be really good for America as well.
Yeah.
And so they got more money from the trust and were able to develop the modular course of study. And so the modular course of study today, it developed differently in the US and in the English and all that,
Yeah.
but the root of it all comes from the work from the former Soviet Union and the funding of all of that. So the modular course of study is then developed for here in the US, and it's used very successfully by districts and other places. But what happens is that the modular course of study in America is not owned by an educational institute. What happens in the former Soviet Union, I end up in charge of that for a while. We end up making our field is a branch of European Nazarene College. So what happens over in Russia is that the program in Russia is connected to European Nazarene College. In other words, it is connected to an IBOE school. What happens in the United States is that this modular course of study kind of takes on a life of its own and is not connected to any IBOE institution. And so, I am getting this old. It's 30 years down the road, and it's time for there to be upgrades to the modular course of study in the USA, Canada. And there's no methodology for that to happen because it's not owned by an educational institution. And so, basically, through this whole group of people, a consortium of people here together in USA, Canada, they decided rather than doing just an upgrade of the modules, why not bring it kind of up now into a new study? So that's how this, it's a long time, a long journey, but it's really the heart of the church to say, how do we do this and how do we do it well? And how do we provide the best product that we can for the church?
Yeah. Well, and a follow-up question, I'm sure the wheels are already turning, but the videos that I'm watching, and I don't remember, Rick Guilfoyle told me how many, but hundreds of videos were done for this. Professors from all the institutions in USA, Canada came in and did lectures. Not every professor, but several professors. Are these videos going to be used in the English-speaking world outside of USA, Canada for NCOS? Is there intentionality in that, or what's the thought process on that, if I can ask?
Well, it's not really my area of purview, so I don't really know. My engagement in this process at this end, which is kind of fascinating because I was involved over in the original process over Russia.
Yeah.
But at this end of it, I'm not involved in that part of the process. I was simply invited to be one of the professors and primarily helping to write the curriculum for the church history course. I also did a number of lectures for the women in ministry course, but I wasn't one of the ones writing that course.
Well, and so then here's the question I was thinking about as I was preparing this morning. I like to consume information in an audio way. I was watching a video this morning of it was a TikTok video, full confession, of a person explaining a Caravaggio painting, The Calling of St. Matthew. And I thought that was a cool way to get information. I didn't even think about that, but I'll take information any way I can get it. In school right now, obviously I'm reading a lot of physical information, but you're traveling all the time. How do you get information? I mean, what's the primary way that you digest information? Are you physically reading books? Are you listening to books? You got a Kindle? Because exhaustive information in this. I mean, again, context for listeners, I just listened to your great Schism lecture right after your Christendom lecture. Prior to that, you were talking about art in medieval Europe. I mean, you got information all over the place. So how do you get information?
Well, I think you simply get information if you're open to it wherever you are. So the other day, we finished district assembly in North Carolina on Friday night, and then I was going to preach at a church in North Carolina on Sunday. And so we're driving from one place to another, and bless my dear husband's heart, because he has to live on the church history tour. So I look it up and I say, hey, we're going to go to Salem, North Carolina. And I did not realize that Salem, North Carolina had been founded by the Moravians. Okay.
Huh, I didn't know that either.
Well, so, you're constantly going, oh, wait a minute, there's stories here. So for those who don't know, the Moravians were very influential in the spiritual life and development of John Wesley. It has to do with Moravians that he met on the boat when he comes to America or going home from America as a missionary, that he's surprised by their spiritual lives and about the depth of their spiritual lives. They were missionaries like crazy. So we go to Salem, North Carolina, and we go to the Moravian Museum. And so then, how do you absorb information? You pay attention. So we're walking through this museum, and this lady goes, well, this one thing on the wall, it's just really cool. It's like a tree that shows the development of the missions of the Moravians. And so then I go and I look at it really closely. Now, I speak German, so I can read the German that's on there, because the Moravians were originally from Germany.
Yeah.
And then I notice there's a branch of this tree that's making its way to Russia. And I see St. Petersburg, and I see Astrakhan. And then it says the Volga colonies. Now, we're talking about a little leaf on a giant picture, okay? That this probably wouldn't have made sense to anybody, but I took a picture specifically of this. Why do I take a picture of this? Because my mother's family is from the Volga colonies. And my mother told me that there was a family story that missionaries came from Germany and brought a holiness revival to the colonies.
Wow. Yeah.
That's
really interesting.
From. And right there on that little tree.
Got the evidence. Yeah.
Is the evidence of it right there.
Wow.
And so you say, how do you learn this stuff? It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. And this is kind of fun, because I think that the Lord knows the things that give us joy. And so I think that sometimes some people call them God winks, but sometimes I think they're these little God winks. God goes, hey, if you just kind of look at that right there.
Take the scenic route. Yeah.
Okay. So then something else that's really fascinating is that we end up going to the Moravian church, and there's a lady giving a little lecture in there about the Moravian church. And then at the end, she plays the organ and all the music for us, and all that kind of stuff. Well, so we're sitting there, and in the pews are the hymn books. And I want to look at the Nicene Creed that they might have in that hymn book. Okay. And so this is also being a church history nerd, right? So their Nicene Creed is without the filioque.
Really?
So that means something to you. Now, to a lot of people, it may not mean anything. That's another little wink or another little breadcrumb. Okay. So years ago, my daughter, when she was at I forget if it was at Olivet or at the seminary, had done a paper, and she and I had talked about, the connection between John Wesley and to the Eastern Church. And we had suspected that connection might be through the Moravians.
Yeah.
And the influence of the Moravians. And so here you find the Eastern version of the Nicene Creed is to this day still the version that is used by the Moravians. And so it means that the Orthodox Church or Cyril and Methodius must have made their way all the way up to Bohemia, and have an influence there. And so it does provide you with a very, very direct connection of Wesley and to the Eastern Church Fathers. We know he read them, but you can almost suspect that maybe there is a spirituality from that part of the church that really influenced him in that way. So, you say, how do you find these things? You don't necessarily go searching for them, but if your eyes and your ears are open, you discover something in a picture, you discover something in a hymn book, but you have to kind of know what you're looking for.
Those puzzle pieces, those connection points. That's really cool. So why do you suspect that they held to that? Why do you think the Moravians, you think it is because they were getting connections from the Eastern Orthodox Church? You said coming to Bohemia, going back to, that's really fascinating.
So I think that the missionary work in that part of the world, in that part of Eastern Europe, and what, and it is fascinating because Jan Hus, who was burned at the stake at Constance, so that's another thing. I'm in Eurasia with the regional director. Jim Ritchie was a regional director, and we decided to go over to Constance for the day. And I said, well, hey, if we're in Constance, we need to go to the cathedral. And he said, why do we need to go to the cathedral? And I said, well, this is because this is where, one of the great church council meetings is held here. And as a matter of fact, you go inside, you discover it's during a time where there were 3 different popes and they had to make decisions. And Jan Hus is burned at the stake there in Constance. And so, but it's so easy just to walk past the statue of Jan Hus and not even pay attention. Not even notice what the story was. And yet it's like so much history that had happened there. But see, he's Catholic. And so that's why it's so fascinating, right? That they would have the Orthodox version of that creed. So there was obviously Eastern influence in them. Yeah.
Well, do you think there was a desire from some of those proto-reformers to kind of get back to the original, when they were doing the primitive church, kind of their frustration with Roman Catholic? I don't know. I find that fascinating because, well, I think
it's more tradition, actually. I think that somehow there was more.
You think there was missionary Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Because I don't know that they would have been able to do. I don't know if they would have had the opportunity to have the sources to be able to go back and to be intentional.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating. So you get information. So, okay, for reading information, are you a physical book reader? I think I've asked you that before. Do you listen to audio?
I listen to a lot of audio because I travel so much.
Yeah.
Super easy. I can listen to 2-3 books a week sometimes when I'm traveling, because, got my backpack on, going through an airport, just listening to books. So, yeah. But I read physical books as well. And I read off of Kindle a lot. And here's just a little tip for anybody that's doing official research. If you use the Kindle in your laptop, if you cut and paste, it'll bring your citations over with it. So that's a really sweet.
Yeah, that is nice. That's nice. Well, I've had my Kindle. Do you have your Kindle read to you? I have my Kindle read to me sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, I do that. That's a nice little feature.
Too. Yeah.
Yeah, just because, like you're saying, you're traveling and can't be reading. Yeah. My dad, so I'm going to get him in trouble, but my dad back in the day before the advent of audiobooks would have a physical book on the wheel as he was doing on long trips, which was totally illegal. But that's how he was getting information back in the day. So.
Yeah.
But the audio stuff has been awesome to get so much information that way. So, well, I'm going to ask you, okay, I came up with a fun question. This is a fun history question, and you as a church historian will reject the premise of the question off the bat. So just play with me a little bit. But and I wrote it up, so I'm going to read it to you. Historians usually cringe at picking a golden age. But if you were forced to drop yourself into one specific decade or movement in church history, not because it was easy, but because the church was at its most vibrant, faithful, or creative, when and where would you go?
Oh, I can't pick one. Because there's so many, I don't know. There's something good that I feel like you could pick from all over. So let's do it this way. The early church, 0 to 300. In some ways, it's incredibly difficult because of the persecutions, and yet there's something golden age about it, because I think there's a lot of purity of Christianity in that time and that season, and people are people are literally converting to Christianity, even though they're facing all these persecutions, and they're infiltrating, all the way up through society and everything. So I think there's that golden age. But let me just say, then you go into like the 4th century and beyond, and you're kind of looking at this season where it is kind of becoming a little more institutionalized. But even when it's becoming a little more institutionalized, it's when our theology is being written. It's when, kind of the systems are being set and established. And now we've got millions converting to Christianity. And I mean, the numbers are absolutely astounding. And so then you kind of go through, but none of it, let me just say, none of it is ever totally peaceful. I mean, I think maybe we have this, if you want to use the term golden age, but I don't ever see it as just a golden age. There's always a pushback against wherever we are with Christianity and kind of what's happening. If I want to move up into more contemporary times, I would, look back at the Great Awakenings, the revivals. Again, hard to say that those are golden ages, because there's a lot happening in society. There's a lot of even pushback. It's even from Christianity, people struggling and stuff. What's the stuff that's going on? But there are always different eras, and there's always, let me just say, I think there's always something golden that we could find in each era. But even in an era that you might call them golden age, there's always challenges and pushback.
That's good.
What about you? What would you choose?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, for me, I'm thinking more of it like a. I'm going to reject my own premise, but if I had to choose, I just think there's so many events that would be worth witnessing. I mean, just the early church councils. Yeah. Wouldn't that be fun, just to go and just be a fly on the wall and listen to the debates? Obviously, assuming, language, but assuming I can hear it and understand it. Obviously, it would be silly if I went back and I'm not reading. I know I'm not understanding any of the Greek, the ancient Greek. But I think obviously the church councils. I nerd out on the Reformation, so there's so many elements of the Reformation. Yeah. But as you noted in one of the lectures, what a bloody time! I mean, the wars of religion. So where do I land in the Reformation? Is it just random? Something I've often liked to think about, you can do this for Old and New Testament, is that if a loved one of yours was shot off into the past, you didn't know where they went, or, well, maybe you know where they went, but you didn't know when they went. I would assume, this is what's interesting about the true church as we study history, is we'd hope they'd find an expression of the church, because that's where they'd be the most at peace. There's an element in the sense that the church kind of always has been, the safe space throughout church history. But obviously, there's expressions of the church not being done correctly, as the wars of religion that I just mentioned. But I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm studying Arminius right now, so it'd be fun to just kind of go pick his brain as he was doing his declaration of sentiments, as he was coming up to that and things like that. So,
I've told Chuck that my dream vacation would be if time travel were possible.
Yeah.
And I would love to go to different places in time and just watch. I would like to be an observer of the real thing and see what it's really like. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, outside, let me ask you a different way. Old Testament, where do you go? What do you want to see in the Old Testament?
Oh, what do I want to see in the Old Testament? Yikes. I'm looking for a time of peace.
Right. That's tough.
Early in Solomon's reign.
Yeah, I was just thinking that's funny you mentioned. I was literally just thinking the temple, the consecration of the temple would have been pretty cool to see.
Yeah.
Solomon, yeah. Early in Solomon's reign. Late David, early Solomon, huh?
Yeah.
That's good.
It's pretty specific, but
Yeah. All right, I'm going to throw another question at you. You ready? So looking across church history, from house churches, monastic networks, the papacy, papal monarchs, and then the modern denominational structure, how our church is structured. So I probably just gave you what you're going to answer, because you're going to say our polity is the best. Outside of the Church of the Nazarene polity, what expression of church governance do you think is the healthiest? as you study it? Is there moments in time before the Church of the Nazarene? You're obviously going to study the Oberlin movement, where you think about church structure and polity, and you think that's a good way to model it.
Just to be honest, you'll find good things in all of them. You'll find bad things in all of them, because the thing is that we are humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll admit to you, what was a challenge when we were in Russia and talking about our church polity was that I did not realize how grounded our church polity is in the democratic process.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
actually, we think, oh, well, this is really great.
Mm-hmm.
And the people would say, you need to tell us how to vote. Like, no, you get to actually vote. They're like, no, we've never done that. We don't know.
Yep. Yep.
And as a matter of fact, the whole idea of like voting for a district superintendent or voting for this thing, they actually found really challenging and almost repulsive because it wasn't part of who they were. That's when I began to realize how cultural, even things like polity within a church are. So honestly, we have a lot of democratic principles in how the church functions. And then you put that church into a non-democratic society and they struggle with it, so that's interesting. But what do I like about it? I do like the democratic process that we have in it. And, something else that I have really grown to love and appreciate is that we have 6 general superintendents. Now, some people would say, well, that really slows things down. It does, in a sense. But right now, when I see a lot of what's happening in maybe large non-denominationals and stuff where there is not accountability, slowing down is not necessarily a bad thing. There is accountability among a group of 6 people. There is the ability to consult with one another. You're not one person that's just out there. And, the thing is that when one of those persons has a failure, people are afraid to even mention that failure because it creates such instability to the entire network. And that's one of the reasons I really love why we do what we do. And we've never had just one general superintendent. Even from the beginning, we had 2. And so that is something about our polity that I really appreciate. Now, it's a little bit of a messy polity because it's a bottom-up, top-down, mess it all up in the middle kind of thing. But it's who we've chosen to be, and I thank God for that.
Well, and I'm sure you deal with the brunt of, at least I've heard it, so I won't name names, but it seems like a lot of people are, even in our democratic America, a lot of people will say, well, why don't the generals just act on this? Why don't the generals just act on this? But we have a polity in which the district holds a lot of power. And so it's funny that everyone wants a tyrant, not that the generals are tyrants, but everyone wants someone to act quickly and dictatorial when it's their way. You know what I'm saying? But, a lot of times you get a lot, I think, from what I've heard, you get a lot of hits, the generals do, when things get slowed down in process. But there is a process in the Church of the Nazarene that sometimes people don't like, but it is interesting to think about how other churches may act faster on things, but if they're acting faster, they're not acting together on those things. And so it is, and we see that in the General Assembly, of course. The General Assembly is a good expression of our church polity because it does take long. We do wait for translations. We do wait for each person to speak. We do follow Robert's Rules of Orders. But just the process, I think it's interesting. I mean, I personally think that's the most distinctive thing about the Church of the Nazarene. We can talk about all these other things, but it's like, I think we're the only denomination crazy enough to say, let's do this together and truly have representation throughout the throughout the global church. But it's fun to watch.
There are very few. You have the Catholics, the Seventh-day Adventists. There are a few out there that try to do that. And yet, I think it is part of the beauty of who we are. We have chosen to be one great, big, messy family.
Yep.
That's what we've chosen.
Yep. Absolutely. So a follow-up question, something you mentioned. When you grew up as a missionary in Germany and you were a missionary in Russia, speak to the fact, so we were we're automatically assuming as American listeners of all these denominations. But that's, as you're reading through church history, the Great Schism was a great schism. I mean, the church was one thing. Obviously, there was differences between the Greek and the Latin, and then that broke. And then the Reformation, in a sense, kind of shatters the vase, and there's all these different iterations. But as Americans, we grow up seeing the Baptists, we grow up seeing the Congregationalists, the Episcopalians, the Presbyterians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What was that like for you, or what vantage point did you have growing up where you were in a land that really maybe only knew about one or two expressions of the Christian church?
Well, I don't know if I remember that much from my childhood. My parents would have more understanding, but being in the former Soviet Union, suddenly they were talking about freedom of religion. And in the 1990s, that meant everything. That meant all of us were free and that they really excited about us being there. That began to change. And today, when they talk about freedom of religion, they mean you're free to be Christian, Jewish, Muslim. But when they say you're free to be Christian, they mean you're going to be Orthodox. And so, this is something I hope that people, even in America, kind of understand, that this separation of church and state is that we do not have a state-run form of Christianity. In other words, the state doesn't have its fingers in it. What you have in Russia is Russian Orthodoxy, which really wanted to go back and remodel itself on the empire, the Roman Empire, which is where you had the patriarch and the emperor who ruled together, which was the patriarch and Caesar. And so most people don't understand the word czar is the Russian word for Caesar. In other words, they remodeled what was happening in the Roman Empire. So what they wanted to do when the Soviet Union fell was that the Orthodox Church wanted to regain its status as being on par with the government leadership and to gain that power and that seat of authority. So what does that do to all of us? It just means that all of us, literally, we were called enemies of the state because they felt like you were, or the leadership might say, to be Russian is to be Orthodox. Therefore, for you to come in and teach any other kind of Christianity would be anti-government, whatever. So, so you live in this state of, you're certainly not favored in any way, shape, or form, but it kind of feels like first century Christianity. There's something kind of pure about it as well. For those who truly wanted to come and be a part of this faith, it cost them something. And I actually found some very beautiful expressions of following Jesus Christ when it costs you that much to do it,
What was that like for people that you interacted with that grew up in the Soviet Union and Russia, hearing about the Church of the Nazarene? Did they think it was their reaction thinking it was an insurgent faith, a cult, or, what is this? It's non-Christian. What was that like?
The word cult is used a lot, because they really didn't have any understanding of where it fit. But let me also say, the government would say that like 70% of the people in the country are Orthodox, 2% of the people go to church, and 0.5% of the people who go to church go to Protestant churches. So get this, of all the people that actually attend church, 25% are Protestants.
Yeah.
So where faith is lived out, the Protestant faith is very strong, very, very strong.
Yeah.
So again, it was really the commitment to Christ, and, whether that was really important, because to be Orthodox is basically cultural. It's not to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So when we watch people that accepted Christ and their lives were truly transformed, they're going to be all in.
So, follow-up question to something you mentioned earlier. Are you going to be able to go to the town in the Volga region at some point and try and connect that little leaf of the Moravian? Is that something you're going to be able to do, or do you think you'll be able to make a connection point with that?
I've already been there.
So but you've been there since Salem, or you're saying you've been there
No.
previously, and so you've made the memory connection and all that. Okay.
Yeah. I had been there previously.
Yeah.
There's not much left.
Yeah.
I actually have a picture of the old Lutheran church it's a village called Ust-Zollichad.
Mhm.
I have a picture of the church where my family would have gone to church. There's not a lot left of the German colonies. World War II and Stalin was worried that the Germans would fight with the Germans. That's also another whole church history, not church history, but a historical kind of piece. What happens in the mid 1700s is, again, it's not a golden age in Europe. There's
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
wars that are happening, and a lot of people don't know, but Germany is not united. It's a whole bunch of different little kingdoms and everything. And so life is really difficult for the peasants that are there. And a German young girl ends up marrying the Russian Tsar. Her name is Catherine the Great. She's an incredible leader. And so what she does is she invites German people who need to flee their own country because things are so rough there. She says, come to Russia and live along the Volga River, or some end up down in Ukraine. And she basically uses Germans as a human barrier between the Russians and the Mongols. Okay. And so she says you get 100-year lease on property. You get to live in German communities. You speak German. It's as if you are Germans, but you will live in this region. And so that's what my relatives did. Life was rough in Germany. They moved along the Volga and they live as Germans. As a matter of fact, their passports forever say that they are still Germans. So now you're coming up to World War II. Okay, it's almost 200 years later, right? Yep. And Stalin is afraid that these people are going to fight for the Germans. But you also have to know that by this time, the people that are the Volga Germans, they speak Old German. It would be like running into somebody that speaks English from 200 years ago, like with all of these and thous and all that kind of stuff. Like they are this little insular kind of group. My mom's family left in about 1882 and came over this way because the contract was up. The 100 years was up. And so things started to get bad. And so a lot of them left, but some of them stayed. So for World War II coming up, so this is the story. There's a Nazarene gentleman who has discovered his relatives in the Volga region, and they're in a village right next to where my mom's village has been. And he says, I want to come. I want to visit the village. And so I go with him. A whole group of us go. We fly down to Volgograd. We get in a van. We drive up to this village. And we sit in this home. And this woman unpacks this incredible story. And I'm sitting there. And the home that I'm sitting in is a little village house. The only modern convenient is electricity because Stalin had these 5-year plans and he puts in electricity. It still has outdoor plumbing. It is like going to a house from 100 years ago in a village. There's carts with animals going down the dirt road. And we're sitting in this place and she says, do you want me to tell you about what happened during the war? And she said, I still remember the night when Stalin came and got all of our men. And she said, they dug a hole at the end of the village. And she said, we listened as they screamed, as they buried all of our men alive. And she said, and the next day they came and got all of us women and the children, and they put us in cattle cars, and they sent us to Siberia or to Kazakhstan. And she said, we've been there now since the war, and they had just gotten back in the last 5 years. So you ask, have I been to the village? There's not a lot left. And to listen to their stories, they talked about the forced starvation. They said, did we tell you about when we ate grass like the cows? Because there was nothing left to eat. It was one of the most moving moments of my life. And that I sat there and I said, but by the grace of God, this was my family story. Why did my great-grandfather say enough is enough? and pack up and move away?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but my life is entirely different because one man said, I won't put my family through this. So seeing that little Volga leaf on the Moravian tree meant a lot to me.
Yeah. You obviously have thought about this in so many contexts and are thinking about it now, but how do you, as a general superintendent, of people under persecution, how do you think about these things? I mean, obviously that's a really silly question, but how do you think about the ongoing war in Russia and Ukraine? And we have churches on both sides, and Israel and Lebanon and all these things. How do you think about all those things and still have, obviously, hope that the churches and communities are still thriving there?
It's hard. I do want to say that anytime there have been persecutions, kind of refines the church, because really what the remnant that's left are really true believers, right? It's an interesting thing. Actually today my mind goes a lot to Iran because I've been learning a lot about the movement of believers that are there.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty incredible.
Over 1 million, right? I heard that. I think there's over 1 million Christians, maybe more in Iran. Is that right?
I think they're thinking between 4 and 5 million. It's kind of the fastest growing.
I've heard that. Yeah.
And so I'll to be honest with you, I am praying every day for God's protection over God's people in Iran. And I think we have a solemn responsibility to be praying for those who are being persecuted. The war in Russia and Ukraine, that's highly, highly complicated. My prayer is the war would end. Oh, Lord, help that war come to an end. It's so awful. I don't see it as much as religious persecution. It's just, in my mind, it's just evil. It's just evil. And yeah, so, yeah, it's ambitious people doing things for the wrong motivations.
Yeah.
And isn't that what always happens?
Yeah. Yeah. And in my conversation with Dr. Lowe a couple weeks ago now, I thought he gave good advice, and he says, be careful what you're being told, just question what you're hearing and things like that. But, and inevitably, you think about these things and tyrants and dictators, but it's interesting when you said that thing about when you were talking to Russian Christians and they said, tell us how to vote. There's a whole generational millennia of people that didn't grow up in the democratic West. So we automatically assume since they're not like us, they must be wrong, but you think about some of these areas in the Middle East that have gone through so many regime changes, and ultimately the Christian church suffers the most, it seems like, through that. So it's funny that you mentioned the church in Iran, because obviously if more unrest happens, it seems like the Christian church will suffer the most in Iran, and that's something that I think we don't think. I don't hear anyone really in the media talking about that. I'll put it that way. It's very few that do.
I don't, and honestly, how do I pray? I pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Yeah.
And I think often to Daniel, who was in that part of the world, and how he prayed, and he had to wait for the angel to come because the angel was busy fighting wars and things. And I feel like, and I'm with Mark, be careful what you hear, because I believe that there are things in the heavenly realms beyond what we can even comprehend. And so therefore we have to pray in the Spirit, and we have to pray, Lord, this is, you get this much more than I do. Your kingdom come, your will be done.
Amen. That's good. Well, Dr. Sunberg, I think that's a wonderful end note, but I always want to ask our guests how our listeners can be praying. So you're going on a sabbatical, so I'm just going to request that for you, be praying for your restful time. But how else can our listeners be praying for God to intervene in your life for you, to give you peace?
Well, I think, I started by saying this is a season of listening and knowing what God wants me to say and do for this coming year. So pray for discernment, and that I will slow down enough to really listen and hear from the Lord.
Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us. And again, you've been such a great support to the Holiness Today podcast. So we're so thankful. Continue to be a champion of it. We love hearing from you. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, good to be with you. Thank you, Nate.
We'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to us and follow us on social media. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon, Audible, and wherever else you may find your podcasts.